It's Wednesday, June 24th, and welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Shiva. I am your primary mourner, commentary editor, John Podhoretz. With me, with mirrors covered, sitting on low chairs, we have senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John. Good to be here on Sackcloth Wednesday.
Yes, we have contributing editor and host of the Breaking History podcast, Eli Lake. Hi, Eli.
Hi, John. To invert the line from the Big Lebowski, the republic, your republic is over. The bums won. Anyway.
And contributing editor Jonathan Schanzer Poobah at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Hi, Jonathan.
May you find comfort among the mourners of New York and Jerusalem.
Thank you very much. Now, we are referring here to the process of what is known as Shiva, that is the mourning period, 7-day mourning period that follows the funeral of someone who has passed. And I'm not quite sure who has passed. We know who lost last time. We know that two sitting congressmen in New York, Adriano Espaillat and Dan Goldman, lost their races against insurgent candidates from the Democratic Socialists of America, sponsored by Mayor Zoran Mamdani. A third running in an open seat, Claire Valdez, won her race. So Mamdani scored a trifecta. The three candidates that he championed and sponsored will end up in Congress in November, because there will not be any credible Republican Party counterweight to them in these overwhelmingly Democratic districts. And why is this important? It's important to me. I live here. But let me just put it to you this way. Imagine it's October 8th, and I say to you, in 2 years and 8 months, there will be an anti-Zionist Muslim mayor of New York City who will be shepherding three anti-Zionist candidates into the U.S. Congress behind him, whose primary issue, both in the election in New York City and in the congressional election to represent New York in Washington, and by the way, some state Senate seats won also last night in New York, is hatred of Israel, defunding Israel, breaking our relationship with Israel, and all of that. Primary issue, not secondary, not like, oh, by the way, I'm also an anti-Zionist. You can say that Mamdani won because he talked about affordability. We all now, I think, know that that's not true. It's not true because of this result, in particular, because of the secret sauce of the Democratic Party's insurgent class that is staging a takeover of the party the way the Tea Party staged a takeover of the Republican Party in 2009 and 2010. The secret sauce is Israel, is the word genocide, is the idea that we need to fundamentally change the relationship between the United States and Israel to turn Israel into a country toward which we have a hostile rather than a friendly posture. Eli Lake, you began your career covering New York City politics, I believe. You did work at the
I
New
did
York
a
Sun
stint in
covering New York
Washington
City
covering
politics.
the EPA for a newsletter, but yes, I was a New York Sun guy early on. Yes.
Okay.
And covering it.
Okay, so that was, a couple of decades.
Yeah.
It's a couple of decades ago, but what you
Yes.
what you do know, and what has been a consuming interest of yours, is the ideological battle between the old left, the Stalinist left, the new left, the anti-Zionist left,
Yes.
and the conventional liberal Democratic Party of old. So how stands the Union, Eli?
It's horrible, and I wanted to say that you're factually correct. This was an anti-Zionist, campaign, but anti-Zionist is too antiseptic for what we just saw. This woman, Darelisa Chevalier Meinhof, or whatever her name is, she, on October 8th, was at the rally celebrating October 7th. She was there cheering it on. This was not a matter of no comment. This wasn't, even Mamdani, he wasn't the next day. And even her, so she was there. And when she's asked about it, would you condemn Hamas, which should be the easiest thing in the world, given who they are, given the fact that Hamas torments Palestinians, shoots Palestinians' alleged collaborators in the kneecaps, won't do it. She will not disparage her revolutionary brothers and sisters. That is insane to me. I mean, and you add that with Adam Hamawi in New Jersey, who was a character witness for the Blind Sheikh, who was the in his trial on the first World Trade Center bombing. And you look at the direction of these new DSA socialists who are taking over the Democratic Party. Jamie Kirchick is correct when he says the DSA hates the Democrats more than they hate the Trumpists and the Republicans. It's a 5-alarm emergency. This is a catastrophe. And of course, by the way, Darelisa Chevalier Meinhof, as I am now calling her, she went to Columbia. Of course she did. Columbia is ground zero for all of this. And you combine that with that horrible incident. Listen, Dan Goldman is no great shakes. I hope we get into it. Dan Goldman, in my view, was a kind of, an Adam Schiff kind of type, resistance figure. And, I had plenty of criticisms of him, but that he gets singled out, for supporting genocide because, he didn't read from the exact script. And as you pointed out earlier, that's not exactly our definition of a pro-Israel guy. It's a moral catastrophe. And what I worry about politically right now is that the counterbalance, the natural counterweight, the reason why there should be a big blinking light, don't nominate people who can't condemn terrorists, is because you're going to have a general election ad and they're going to tie it around the Democrats in the midterms, and that's going to lose votes for you. But can the Republican Party do that when the Republican vice president is assuring us that the Iranian, negotiators, the remnants of this regime that we once were encouraging only a few months ago to be overthrown by the people, are now reasonable and have come to see the importance of working with the international community and so forth? So I don't know who's going to stand up for basic things like, we're Americans, we hate terrorists, because I'm confused at this point. I don't think it's a really low moment.
Seth, the question that Eli raises, I think that is so important here is, ordinarily you would say, whoa, Republicans just got a big gift. Look at all this material that they're going to be able to use in November against Democrats. Darelisa Chevalier wiping her hands on the American flag and, saying no cops ever. She doesn't ever want there to be a cop. Other stuff that Graham Plattner has said in Maine, all of that. It's like, oh, it's just a huge gift to Republicans. But I don't think so, because I think, yes, it will be very effective juicing Republicans in the places where Republicans are likely to win anyway. The story here is the conversion of the Democratic Party into the Democratic Socialists of America Party, and the fact that there seems to be almost no resistance to that. And what you're going to have, like the Tea Party did with Republicans, is conventional Democrats shifting over to the direction of the DSA and Mamdani and everything that the squad began in 2018, going to them to save their hides, the way Republicans went to Trump to save their hides. the way that conventional Republicans went to the Tea Party to save their hides rather than getting swept up and destroyed by this new tide.
Yeah, well, this is what I've referred to in the past as the progressive street, because when Mamdani was asked yesterday again to comment on Dan Goldman being not kicked out of the coffee shop, but told he's not welcome back there anymore, banned, whatever, his order refunded. Mamdani said something like, well, I'm all in for, real political debate, but what we saw yesterday goes beyond that, or something like that.
It went beyond. That's all he said.
It went beyond, right. There is Mamdani, just as a lot of these politicians fear crossing Mamdani. What you see from Mamdani is that what they and Mamdani fear is crossing the crazies in the base. Though the inmates are running the asylum. And that's really the lesson from last night, which is that if you're too afraid to full-throatedly denounce, banning a Jew from your coffee shop in New York. Remember, he's the mayor. He's the executive. He's not a state legislator anymore. So that one lesson is that the inmates are running the asylum. And Mamdani, who looks like he's in control, is riding the tiger. He's got a better grip on the tornado than other people in the Democratic Party, but he's still being driven by this populist mass of anger and anti-Semitism. The other thing that I want to say is
it populist? Before you go on, is it populist?
Well,
because if you look at the breakdown, according to the New York Times this morning, if you look at the breakdown of the vote in the district that we're talking about here, that is Lander versus Goldman, an anti-Zionist Jew versus a non-anti-Zionist Jew. I wouldn't, by the way, exactly call Dan Goldman the most full-throated supporter of Israel I've ever seen. Like we talk about a soft, I mean, it's terrible that anti-Semites use whatever little support for Israel he might have as a weapon against him. But if I wanted somebody in the trenches to be helping me in a fight over Israel, Dan Goldman is not the last person I would turn to, but one of certainly not anybody that I would think would be a stalwart guy in the fight. But if you look at the breakdown, according to the exit polling, of who voted, or maybe not exit polling, but where location polling in this very large district, it's 750,000 people living in this district. The poorer people in the district voted for Goldman. The most working class parts of the district voted for Goldman. It's the yuppies. It's the people in the West Village. It's the people in Brooklyn Heights and Cobble Hill and Red Hook and people. That's who voted for Lander. So we can call this populist, but it's the populism of the educated, college-educated, having 3 jobs in tech to support yourself.
But they're not by the way, they're not
educated,
yuppies,
but
John.
Downwardly mobile.
Yeah, they're downwardly mobile. That's exactly. The point is that they have useless graduate degrees.
College educated, but downwardly mobile is what makes up this sort of base of voters. And I would say also, by the other thing is that
I don't even think they're downwardly mobile. You know what?
A lot of them are.
I'm going to reject this now. They may be downwardly mobile because they're 25 years old and their parents own 2 homes and they're sharing an apartment with 3 other people in New York City. But you know what? Everybody from time immemorial has come into New York City without a lot of money and lived in small spaces, sharing them, whether you were an immigrant or somebody coming in. If you're 25 years old, you should not expect to live on Central Park West. That is not what downward mobility is. It is not.
But that's how they see. In other words, they see.
No, I want to reject. There's the huge difference between this generation of overly educated baristas and others. Okay, and the difference is that they have zero job prospects for making as much money as their parents because they were the ones
I
who
think that's
decided to get
totally
masters.
ridiculous. Eli. In 2010, there was a 10% unemployment rate. When I graduated from college in 1982, the unemployment rate was 10%. Okay, this idea that they face unique headwinds that are
No, I'm
making
not.
their lives impossible.
No, I have zero sympathy.
Maybe
I'm
they
making
feel
a different point. I'm making a different point.
Okay.
I am not saying that they are more oppressed
You
than
said
other
they have
people.
zero job prospects, and that is
Well, no, they have job prospects, but not the jobs that they think they're entitled to. And the reason is because they got useless degrees at elite universities that are not going to help them. That's the thing. So they work for like nonprofits or and they have all these side hustles and everything like that. That's the difference. The difference is that there are people who would, I'm going to make it. I'm going to get a job in publishing. And there was a career path for them. I'm saying, like, what's the career path for the, indigenous anti-colonialism studies major other than the 5% that will go to graduate school and get actual jobs at universities? What I'm saying is that this is a product of the kind of bloat of our elite institutions and the failure of those elite institutions that are supposed to be preparing a leadership class and are instead preparing a kind of dilettante class. That's the difference.
Okay, so it probably doesn't matter what the makeup is of the vote here. What matters, because we have different districts. We have a district in which it's not the Lander Goldman district, in which the head of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus was ousted by Daria Eliza Chevalier. That's Adriano Espaillat, the head of the Hispanic Caucus. That would ordinarily be an impregnable job to be ousted from, particularly from your left. Like, that's identity politics. That's supposed to be the glory of the Democratic Party, is the way that it, has a gorgeous mosaic. So Mamdani's way of defending it or working on it is to say that I believe saying that she's an Afro-Latina, although now I'm wondering whether I'm talking about Claire Valdez. So I'm sorry, I'm very confused about everything. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying is, like, this wave is a real wave. It's a wave in New York City, but it's not, as you mentioned with Adam Hamawi, not just in New York City. And the question is what wisdom Democratic politicians across the country are going to take from this. The wisest people that I know in politics who get everything right. I'm not going to say two or three different people. Tell me that they're pretty sure that Graham Plattner will prevail in Maine, and I'm like, really? He seems like when Susan Collins really gets going, and it's like, no, the partisan. We are going back to our partisan corners. Maine is a blue state. She, defied gravity, and Plattner is a horrible candidate in many ways, but the gravitational pull here pulls the state toward Plattner, and if the atmosphere in the United States is the Democratic Party is moving left and Plattner is moving left, then he's just part of a new political reality in the United States. He's not an outlier. Part of the way you would get Plattner out is to say he can't go into the Senate. He's like a lunatic outlier. Well, he's not. He's less of a lunatic outlier now than he was yesterday. So, that's my that's where my concern holds, and that's why I'm sitting Shiva and looking at real estate in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. But we will now let us turn to the subject that we were intending to talk about today with Jonathan Schanzer and Eli, both of whom have spent the last many years of their lives focusing on exactly this issue, which is where we stand here on Wednesday with the Memorandum of Understanding and Israel's war with Lebanon and with a fight between conversations between Israel, implicitly Israel and the United States, and inside Israel about what it needs to do in Lebanon. John, let me just pose it to you like this. So everywhere I turn, the line from left to right, and I mean responsible right to left, is America's lost this war. We've lost. And Trump said last night, what is wrong with you people? The Iranians have no navy. They have no air force. They're in rubble. You know, their defenses are shot. We have harmed them immeasurably. They're coming begging to us. That's clearly not true. But the fact is that Iran is much degraded from where it was on February 28th. I mean, that's undeniably the reality.
Yeah.
So if we degraded them and set them back and hurt them and all of that, can we say that they have won this war when all they won is our unilateral retreat from the war? Not that they have somehow advanced their own interests, or is this all just sort of like a chess game in the head of the geopolitical chessboard?
Okay, so I think a couple of things can be true at once, and I think it's important to unpack this. I do believe that the campaign waged by the United States and Israel jointly against the Islamic Republic has done an enormous amount of damage to the regime. And yes, the Navy's gone, the Air Force is gone, the top leaders many of them have been killed, command and control structures gone, defense industrial base eviscerated, missile launchers, all of those things really bad shape. And then not to mention the economic situation in Iran, at least for the moment, fairly dire. The political situation also dire. All of those things I think are wins for the United States and for Israel. The problem was how much it cost us to do this. And here's what I mean by that. And we've talked about this, on this podcast lots of times. The U.S. ran low on air defense, on munitions. We started tapping into our oil reserves in ways that I think were unhealthy, and we've heard reports that we actually got as low as we've been since the 1980s in terms of tapping those strategic oil, the strategic petroleum reserves. And then on top of that, you have the Islamic Republic holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage, and bringing the price of oil to levels that we didn't want to see, and essentially holding the entire world hostage because they just weren't allowing these ships to come through. So in other words, out of weakness, the Islamic Republic finds strength, aided by probably some poor decision-making on the part of the United States, where we found ourselves at these low levels and at these crisis levels across the board. And that, of course, is all going into the summer months where the president wants to make sure that we have enough oil and that it's not too expensive. And we've got the midterms looming in November. You get a sense of what's going on here. It was a political crisis and the president needed to get out of it. And so he taps J.D. Vance to be the guy that runs this. And I got to say that the negotiations look like we are ceding way too much. The money that we're providing the Iranians is going to allow them to rebuild. The sanctions relief is going to be assigned to the markets that Iran has opened for business, and they're going to be able to redirect this cash toward, missiles and proxies and maybe even nukes. And so what we're finding is that, with all the good things that we were able to accomplish in the first month of this war, for, I think, reasons that we can all understand, we're losing leverage. What I guess I'm trying to understand here is this a good cop, bad cop routine that we're watching between Vance and Trump, and that the final destination for the MOU will be somewhere in between total capitulation and Trump's threats to return to war? Or, are we actually steering this entire thing towards a complete collapse because of our desperation to open up the strait and to end the aftermath of the war? I just don't really understand the strategy. And of course, the Trump administration doesn't have a policy. There is no Trump doctrine. There never has been. I don't think there will be. So what we're left with right now are a bunch of questions that we can't seem to answer. The administration doesn't want to answer, and everyone is scratching their heads in total anxiety. And no one has more anxiety right now than the Israelis. And I'll end the sort of synopsis here. The Israelis are in this impossible situation where the Iranians are, in fact, directing strikes through Hezbollah against them, because we know the Iranians are in Lebanon right now, and they are directing Hezbollah. They're funding them, they're arming them, and they are giving them the operational direction to attack the Israelis. The Israelis then have to respond. It is their doctrine. It also is in the middle of their election cycle, so nobody is going to stand down in the face of aggression from a violent terrorist proxy. And so when they respond, the Iranians, who sparked this thing in the first place, then cry foul and say they're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And all that does is give more leverage to the Iranian negotiators in Switzerland. And J.D. Vance appears to be willing to accede to their demands. So it is this insane knot that feels like it's getting tighter around the neck of the U.S., but also around the neck of the Israelis. And we need a way out.
Eli, today, Trump is going to have lunch with the Republican caucus in the Senate. And we are also told is going to have a meeting with his defense chiefs to talk about munitions. So the theory that was proffered last night at a very interesting live taping of the Dispatch podcast with Jonah and Steve Hayes and Chris Starwalt and Megan McArdle is that Trump is going to get it from the senators. That for the first time, really, in his years as president, they are going to go at him. And there are at least 3 or 4 senators who are now not going to be in the Senate after November, so they have nothing to lose. But that others are going to say, what the hell did you do here? What's going on? You're asking us to defend something that we can't defend. Give us some room. Tell us what the hell you're doing. If that happens, that's going to be a very interesting moment in our recent political history, because generally speaking, Trump has had a quiescent Senate and House, scared of his anger and his retribution, and he is sitting somewhere in the mid-30s at best in his approval rating, and they are looking at him as a potential anchor that was going to drag them down, win the House, possibly win the Senate, and then he's got to go talk about munitions. And you and Jonathan both have been talking about this munitions crisis for the last 6 weeks, and how there may be real world reasons why we had to basically stand down, that we were no longer secure in our ability to work our will without placing our forces in severe jeopardy in a way that Trump was not willing to do, the way actually usually in war you kind of understand that your forces are in jeopardy in a war. That's what a war is. It's not just you shoot at somebody and then they don't shoot back. That's what we now think a war should be, but that's not what war typically is. Anyway, what do you make of Trump today? What can he do today?
Well, keep in mind, yesterday, the Senate already, Republicans defied him because there was a vote that ended funding for the Iran war, which he was angry about. So he's already, losing his grip. I think the way to look at this problem is that in the current moment right now, Iran has fewer ballistic missiles, fewer short-range ballistic missiles than they did at the beginning of the war on February 28th. However, we don't have the interceptors in theater, and if we were to put the interceptors in theater, we would risk provoking the Chinese in the Strait of Taiwan. So, even if we manage to protect our own forces, the ability for Iran to do enormous damage by hitting refineries or a desalination plant in Saudi Arabia or any number of things is just too much. And that means that for the moment, and I want to stress this is for the time being, Iran really does have the world and America by the short and curlies. That said, these things can change quickly. There was briefly in the war, the Israelis put online and then they took back, I guess, but there's something called Iron Beam, which is a laser-based missile defense. I understand that it's not quite ready to be deployed, but it's coming close. There are other Israeli technologies in missile defense that would solve the horrible math problem that are close. So that right there would change the calculus and would remove the overall advantage that the Iranians have, which is beyond the Strait of Hormuz, which everyone talks about. Oh, it's all about geography. It's yes, but it's really this missile problem. So if the Israelis can deploy that, if America can overcome, if we can overcome some of our problems, which we've experienced delays in producing what are known as the SM-3s and the SM-6s and the SM-2s for our Patriot missile defense, which are very expensive. There's a problem with the rocket motor, as I've recently been reporting, that we have to, once we overcome these delays in our system and the Israelis can get their new defense tech online, that would be a game changer. And that's not wish casting. That could be 4 months away in an optimistic timeline, but it's not. What my point is that the Iranians do not have a forever advantage in this regard. And this is their window. And I think what Trump's real strategy overall is, to use his wonderful expression, is to tap the Iranians along. And that's why he likes this 60 days, and then we have another 60 days, because if you are in negotiation, if you're jaw-jawing and you're not warring, then you can get time to solve this problem that we have with our missile defenses. And that, I think, is the center of it. Jonathan, you were going to say something?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I largely agree with the assessment and maybe even the timeline. I think the timeline is incredibly disadvantageous to the United States and to Israel and to the overall outcome that we're looking for. Because, you know, when you start to look at the sanctions relief that we're about to provide, and you look at the cash that we're looking to open up for the Iranians to access, you know, what we actually do is we end up squandering this unbelievable opportunity. The Iranians are in really bad shape right now. They are negotiating from strength because they are holding the world hostage, but they, you know, they're going to bounce back from this. And the question is, if we let this go for another 4 months, and I think, by the way, 4 months is probably very optimistic here when we think about getting our, you know, our missile defense back online and ready to deploy. I mean, I think that is incredibly optimistic. I think we're probably talking about a year or more, at least based on what I've heard. And so what we have is this problem that, you know, may not be solvable for the moment. Now, I will actually just say, in the same breath, I was talking to a foreign diplomat last night, not connected to the Middle East at all, but an astute observer of international affairs. And what this diplomat said was that Iran may actually be in worse shape after things go quiet. In other words, all of a sudden, when the war ends, when the Strait of Hormuz opens, this is probably the moment where the Iranian people are going to have their say. It's the moment where the entire region, which has been paying protection for the regime to stop firing, they're going to want to have their moment too. And they've got a lot of money to be able to spend on things that can undermine the regime. And so the peace actually for the Islamic Republic may be scarier than the war or the negotiations that they're conducting right now, which I found to be a really interesting observation. But the bottom line that really worries me, though, is just the expendability of the leverage that we had, with all the options that we have at our disposal, how is it that we just don't have an answer to the Islamic Republic right now? How is it that we don't have the ability to rally allies who are all irate over the fact that the Iranians have shut down an international waterway? Okay, this is a violation of all norms, all international laws. There is no way that this stands. under any circumstances in the so-called rules-based international order. And yet somehow everybody's quiet, and it's up to the United States to negotiate a horrible deal with the Iranians in order to open this thing up. Now, I understand the U.S. pissed off the Europeans heading into this conflict over Greenland, and I understand that the Trump administration and the Europeans and even the sort of far right in Europe, they can't agree on much these days. But wow, what we're watching is a collapse of the U.S. position. We're watching a collapse of the leverage that we had over the Iranians. We're watching a collapse of the order that we supposedly uphold. I just don't understand the strategy right now, other than waiting for our munitions to get back online in another year or more.
All right. So if I may, and I'm giving you the most charitable read, but. And I'm not holding my breath here. If J.D. Vance or Trump or our negotiating team can, again, tap the Iranians along with the promise of the big payday down the line, but they get, the $24 billion for now. I've been told, and you guys at FDD are the best at this, that's a drop in the bucket for what their broader needs are. So the idea would be that in this negotiation, they would get some, but not nearly enough of the economic relief that they need. And that, and again, we would be buying ourselves some time. And that right there is, I think that's probably the key to all of it, which is that and that's why it's useful in some ways to have J.D. Vance as, the person who promises the moon, and then Trump, and then we saw this week, Rubio somewhat undermining all of that. Rubio said clearly, I think, at one point this week that Iran has no place in Lebanon. Thank God. I hope that's the policy. So this is, an opportunity maybe for some strategic ambiguity and deception to convince the Iranians that they've got more than they really have, and to make sure that the real economic benefits do not accrue to them in this period when we need to restock.
Okay, so it's worse than that because, and this I want to turn to Seth, two things. You mentioned Rubio saying that Iran has no place in Lebanon, and Iran has no place, is now any nation that sponsors a terrorist group and to commit terrorist acts and fire across borders is not part of the community of nations. And he's saying that, and at the State Department, as he is saying that, they're entering the fifth round of negotiations, direct negotiations between Israel and actually Lebanon, right? What we're talking about here is Israel is fighting Hezbollah, a parasitic terrorist group that has burrowed itself into Lebanon, and the government of Lebanon is now willing, though it's an incredibly weak government, this is a very complicated story and you can't tell it so easily, government of Lebanon wishes to embrace this moment as some way of getting itself rid of the Hezbollah cancer that has been, bedeviling it now for 40 years and is causing all of this destruction in the south and parts of Beirut. We sponsored that negotiation, and Vance and Witkoff and Jared and whatever are undermining it in Switzerland. They're creating a mechanism that leaves Lebanon and Israel out of the fate of Lebanon and Israel, while the Secretary of State is hosting the negotiation between Lebanon and Israel. So that ain't tapping anybody along. That is policy chaos. That is, I don't even know what to call that.
Well, though it's worse than that in the sense that, excuse me, sorry. In the sense that they first drew the Lebanese president Aoun out onto the ledge, and then they pushed him off. This is the problem with their with the way things have gone. Is that it's not
who
just
is the they? Who is the they?
Oh, the Trump administration.
Okay.
The Trump administration got the Lebanese government to meet with the Israelis at the ambassadorial level, and then got the president to say, if and when there's a deal, a real deal, a peace deal, whatever, that's when I'll meet Bibi and all that stuff. But the more important stuff that he was saying was Hezbollah are unpatriotic traitors. The Trump administration infused the Lebanese administration with enough confidence that it had their backing, their diplomatic backing, that they went out on a limb and said these things about Hezbollah that, again, in the past, usually gets the person who said it disappeared within weeks. I mean, the way that Hezbollah, the Iranians, the Syrians, and Hezbollah have all controlled Lebanon since 2005, when they had to, sort of officially, unofficially relinquish actual control of the state. They have continued, their campaign of assassination and threats and stuff like that. And these Lebanese leaders know that. So what we did was we kind of drew them out onto the ledge and said, we'll have your back against Iran if you say Hezbollah, meaning Iran, is bad and they need to get out of Lebanon. And then we struck up a deal that said Lebanon is really Iran's domain.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. So that, to me, that's the hardest part of it, is that we almost, we kind of egged on the establishment to first take on Hezbollah before providing them with any means to do so, and then, just let them sort of hang out there on their own.
I would totally agree, and I would also argue that the Israelis are the only leverage that the Lebanese government has, right? I mean, if the idea is that you want to weaken Hezbollah, you need the Israelis to weaken Hezbollah, because the Lebanese government, the Lebanese armed forces can't do this on their own. The only real stick that they have here is for the Israelis to continue to bomb in coordination with the Lebanese government, which has been happening tacitly since the ceasefire, after the Grim Beeper operation and after Nasrallah's assassination. The ceasefire that has held tenuously has actually included the Israelis calling in concerns to the United States, the U.S. coordinating with the Lebanese side. The Lebanese side says, got it, we can't do anything, go ahead and bomb Israel. This is actual coordination on military targets between these two governments. And now all of a sudden, the Lebanese, they don't have their air force any longer because the Israelis have been removed from the picture. And I would even argue that it's even more complicated now, because if you've seen what has been discussed out of Switzerland right now, the mechanism for governing the ceasefire in Lebanon is now under the auspices of Pakistan and Qatar, right? These are the two countries that are apparently trying to preserve the peace, or what is supposed to be peace, between these two countries, all the while Hezbollah is attacking. And then every time Israel does, they get slammed for, violating the ceasefire. This is an insane situation that the Israelis are in. It's an insane situation that the Lebanese are in. It's really hard to understand how we are somehow presiding all over this and how we've let it get to this point. So it is, look, it's a sign that we've lost leverage in these talks. It's a sign that I don't think that we're running the show right now. It really does feel like someone else is. My hope here is that the vice president figures out that this is not going to end well for the U.S. This is supposed to be, I think, an opportunity for him to get some reps, right? He's getting an at-bat here to show everybody what his foreign policy would look like. This is not ending well for the U.S. on lots of different levels. He still has 60 days to turn this thing around if he wishes to. But, man, I think, do we need to just set a different tone with the Pakistanis, with the Qataris, and obviously with the Iranians?
I mean, that's science fiction, what you just laid out there. I say it's science fiction because Vance has clearly thrown in his hand with the idea that our most reliable interlocutors here are exactly the people that you're saying he needs to push out of the way and impose an American concord on. And that's precisely the opposite direction that these negotiations have gone in. We are relying on the Pakistanis. We are relying on the Qataris and the Turks. This is insane. We didn't, like blow our entire defensive munitions cache and go to war in order to restructure the Middle East to the benefit of people who sponsor jihadis, who pay for terrorist organizations, and who house and hide their leadership. Why are we doing this? Well, one possible answer is, and I say this with all due respect, that Vance is an idiot. And why I say this with respect is he's a guy. He went to school. He went to law school. He served in, he did PR stuff, in the military. He wrote a book. He got himself elected to the Senate. He became vice president. He has had no dealings in the world of foreign policy ever before. He has been handed the most complicated portfolio challenge that I can think of in the last 20 years, dealing with this completely incomprehensible military geopolitical situation in which we dominated and destroyed another country's military. They then pull this trick with their waterway and battle us to a draw with a third country, or two third countries involved, Israel and Lebanon, because of Hezbollah. This would bedevil Clemenceau. This would, the treaties of the 19th century that the geniuses who created our modern diplomatic world, this is very hard stuff. And Trump just said, here, you go do it. You take it. He didn't even say to the Secretary of State, who at least has been in the Senate for, 16 years. I was in the Senate for 14 years, and was on the Foreign Relations Committee and ran for president, has a whole worldview that he has been part of and been paying a lot of attention to this. Vance is dropped in it's like asking me to diffuse a bomb. It's like the thing where someone in a movie, you're the person with shaky hands, and they're like, okay, you're the one who is going to have to defuse the bomb, and the clock is ticking, and you have about 72 seconds, and there are 6 wires you have to cut in this sequence, and we don't even know what that is.
I can't wait to see John Podhoretz in Mission Impossible 9. It's going to be great. But look, I think there's another way of framing this, which is the U.S. found itself in a position where, we're getting, the Iranians are holding the world hostage, right? And we have this impossible economic situation. We've got the challenges with our defensive munitions. We've got incredibly skittish Gulf allies that want this thing over. The pressure is building in the United States. You've got, political pressure from the Senate. You can see it now playing out. You can see that the president's hands are tied. There is no way on God's green earth that Marco Rubio wants to engage in a process where he's capitulating to the Iranians and working with the Pakistanis and working with the Qataris for a deal along the lines of what is happening here. I cannot imagine that Marco Rubio would raise his hand for something like this. I don't know
John,
why.
We didn't. Yeah,
but it's his job. It's his job. He's the only one. Okay.
There's a memorandum of understanding that under the auspices of a president notorious for not making good on his promises and changing his positions dramatically, all the time. So in some ways, I'm very skeptical that we are negotiating a new regional architecture for the Middle East at this moment, which is why I think it's more likely that this is a kind of Fabian strategy a strategic retreat. I'm not saying he's going to go to war again. What I'm saying is that I think he just wants to make sure he's tap dancing his way out of a crisis. And if you're Trump, and again, this is a charitable explanation, but if you're Trump, what you could count it as a win that he obviously, I don't think he was ever going to put ground forces in, but it's not a forever war. So he doesn't have to deal with that. Number two, the economy didn't crash. We didn't end up with a global recession as a result of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. We still, we keep pointing out, we did in 2 wars demolish over the course of a year a nuclear program that was perilously close to being able to produce nuclear weapons at an industrial scale. That's now off the table. And the United States, but also Israel, importantly Israel, established that it has now this incredible long-range ability to swoop in and kill your leaders with no problems. And that itself is a kind of new, that's a new ability that Israel has now unveiled since October 7th. You could say the first was Hezbollah, but all of that is to the benefit. And so what we have now is a very Trumpian move where he is promising the world, and it looks like it's this complete free fall and a catastrophe. And these negotiations in Switzerland are, selling everybody out and so forth. Meanwhile, what has changed? Israel is not moving out of Lebanon. Israel is still responding to attacks. I was impressed to see some Lebanese politician the other day still, kind of making, saying these kinds of things. And even his own administration, even Marco Rubio, and even at times Donald Trump in his various tweets seems to be saying that I might change my mind. And even though we know that he can't do it right now and we're not holding our breath, but, hey, if they don't comply, the war is back on and so forth. So I just would put all that in it as well, which is why I think this is just an elaborate strategy to convince the Iranians now they're winning and make them think they're going to get a lot more than they really are. And just like the people who built the casinos in Atlantic City, when the bill comes due on the other side, just like it kind of came to, he's going to stiff them. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for.
So look, I think it's obviously it's an optimistic view of things. I think we could obviously look at the negative view of things, and there are plenty of people out there that are saying that this is a collapse and the sky's falling. I would just say it's not over, right? And I was sort of trying to get at this before, that I still think that the Iranian regime is in for a tough go. They're still in bad shape, even as they might accrue more cash from this deal. I think their isolation, there may be some deals cut with the Arab states. There may be deals cut with the U.S. And there even may be tolls in the Strait of Hormuz at the end of this, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be liked. It doesn't mean that people are going to want to see this regime survive. And there will be, I think, efforts to bring down this regime on top of whatever concessions are being made. I obviously can't speak to whether there's a long-term strategy or to kind of rope-a-dope the Iranians into thinking that things are okay. And then at some point the bill comes due, as you suggest, Eli, and the U.S. has this master stroke. For me, I got to say, the big concern that I have moving forward, and I think, just to broaden this out, we need to get our supply chain. We need to get our house in order here.
Obviously.
For the building out of munitions. We need, that to me seems so important. If you want to really put maybe a positive spin on this, this is a wake-up call, because we're entering into a different era of great power competition. We are the arsenal of democracy. We are the supply chain for allies across the Middle East and in Asia and beyond, not to mention just our own needs in the event that we have other wars to fight in the future. This is one hell of a wake-up call. We're going to have to get our act together there. We're going to have to make sure.
We should bring in this piece of data, which is the pilots of the shot down American aircraft reported that they saw a drone pattern, a drone swarm as their attacker, that they said looked like a jellyfish, that it was moving in
Oh, there could
coordination.
be all kinds of
Right.
crazy new
And that
weapons
is,
out
look,
there.
look, we've all seen maybe at baseball games or we've seen at the Olympic ceremonies that you can take drones and fly them in patterns and they can look like fireworks and they can do all this. The reason I'm bringing this up is to say that we are in a new world, because even Iran, after 2 months of, whatever, 6 weeks of our battering, was able to launch this very limited attack, but using drones, but in a new way, in an innovative way. We see, of course, Ukraine has managed to survive, thrive, and has possibly turned the tide of the war with Russia using this drone technology. Hezbollah is now playing with drones flying into Israel. We are in a new world. And okay, so the thing that frightens me is that Trump is an 80-year-old in constant lunatic, and you are imputing to him a possible strategy that strikes me as being
Not a
unlikely simply
strategy.
because of who he
No,
is.
not a strategy. It's his
Okay.
nature, John. His nature
Well, you
is to
said a
never.
Fabian. You called it a Fabian. You call it a
Well, okay,
Fabian
fine, fair enough.
strategy. So I'm missing.
Fair
Okay,
enough.
but
You're right.
but
But
what
I
I'm
wanted to
saying
say,
is,
it's not. It's just his nature. He's tap dancing. He's trying to make sure he doesn't make
right.
any kind of commitments here.
Right. Okay. So fine. And yeah, his signature isn't worth the piece of paper that it's printed
Right.
on, and he signed something that doesn't really even count. It hasn't counted because the straits aren't open anyway. So the deal isn't
Right.
the memorandum of understanding is not actually working, or is not active. We need to start shifting and moving and playing. And I don't, are they fleet of foot? Do they have the capacity? What the Pentagon is not at its best. The Pentagon is not an innovative, fast-moving operation. It's like the world's largest ship, and it takes 3 years for it to make a circle and turn around. It's not Israel with this possibility of deploying an entirely new laser-based defense system in the air that reduces the cost, we're told, of intercepting something in the air from $2,000 to $25 an intercept.
Also, we fired all the generals.
And he's firing the generals as Hegseth is. So
can I just I want to just interject for just a second, because I do think it's important to acknowledge that our military is the most deadly in the world. I mean, when you look at the capabilities that we just put on display, okay, and you look at the platforms that we use, and you look at the minimal losses that we incurred, the few mistakes that happened were actually mostly, like the Kuwaitis shooting down our own aircraft, right? I mean, what we just put on display was nothing short of incredibly impressive. What is not impressive is the bureaucratic backlog in the Pentagon. That's what has actually just really been exposed. And we need to be aware of the fact that, yes, John, all the things that you just mentioned about the drones and the swarms and the FPV stuff that's being used out of Lebanon, these fiber optic cables that are preventing the jamming of the drones as they come into Israeli airspace, which has been innovated out of Ukraine. Technology is moving at a rapid pace. AI is going to actually play more and more of a role in warfare, which is going to be downright frightening. And I actually think that we have an edge there too right now. I'm not saying that we're going to be creating Terminators and things like that, but I would just say that we are on the cutting edge of all of this. It's us against the Chinese. Our biggest problem right now appears to be, well, it's twofold. One, we can't uphold the order that we are apparently presiding over. We can't uphold international law. We cannot keep international waterways open with the structures and the system that we created. And we're alone in doing that. That seems like a problem. That feels like an alliance problem. It also feels like an unraveling of the U.S.-led world order in some way. And I worry about other strategic choke points that could be exploited. But
I want to talk about the U.S. world order, because Donald Trump is president now. It's June 2026. He will not be president January 21st, 2029. And what happened yesterday and what's happening in Switzerland is very important, because what happened yesterday is that the Democratic Party is undergoing a revolution in real time. And we should not, what we should presume is that the nominee of the Democratic Party is not going to be some middle of the road schlep governor or whatever they call middle of the road. It is more likely that it will be a person that emerges from this unholy and evil stew of anti-Semitism, socialism, and anti-Americanism that is the DSA, stew. And that's on one side. And on the other side, it's more likely than not that J.D. Vance will be the nominee of the Republican Party. And the U.S.-led world order the fight is going to be over who destroys the U.S.-led world order faster. That's what we are looking at. And what Trump, in my view, the thing that he ultimately has punted, unless Eli's right, this isn't over, and that, this is something that we're going to be the engagement with Iran to change the way the Middle East is working and the way Iran works. This is phase one, and that there'll be a phase two. And maybe if there is a phase two, what I'm talking about will happen. But had Trump fought this war to a successful conclusion, the base effect of it on American politics, it's hard to know what it would have been, but it would not have been nothing. It would not have been negligible. He would have scored a foreign policy success with a form of intervention that it would be very hard for even the most radical Democrat to say that regime is gone and that's a better thing for the world than that regime being present. Most people, including people who would vote for DSA candidates, would think that of Iran, an extraordinarily unpopular country in the United States, including to leftists. And Trump has therefore made 2028, unless he follows the Eli strategy, and unless that happens, he has made our, not retreat, but our inability to project our power is going to be, the argument's going to be how to do it more rapidly and with the most damage to us, because that's who is going to be giving voice to the foreign policy questions that face the country when the country has to decide who its next leader is going to be.
You're hitting on the tragedy of all of this, which is that 6 months ago, it looked like we were going to enter a new phase in the Middle East when Iranians were on the streets and before they were mowed down, and after Midnight Hammer, which I think everybody has to say was a success. And we thought that this was the direction of things. This is where things were going. And we thought, and people were saying that this is, even though Trump, for all of his many flaws, this is his opportunity to really grab greatness and then to retreat into this, negotiation in Switzerland and this collapse on what were, longstanding U.S. policies regarding the Iranian role in Lebanon and everything else. And for that matter, Iran's, right to have missiles, which was negotiated away by Obama. But that was one of the reasons why Trump got out of the JCPOA and all of those things. We thought that the regime was finally really in trouble, and it was really in trouble. And I hope that it still is in trouble, and we can't possibly know. But that's the problem, is that the expectations were raised in such a way that even though we can squint and we can say, listen, Trump may very well have actually prevented Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. It's quite possible that one of the results of this, we won't, is that he prevented that, but he won't get credit for it because we thought it was going to be the end of the regime. And Trump was talking like it was going to be the end of the regime 6 months ago. He was encouraging the Iranian people to seize their institutions. So that's the real problem. And you're right in terms of if it's Vance versus DSA, God help us. I mean, what a horrendous choice in many ways. But I think if it is Vance versus DSA, if we're being honest, It's Vance. I mean, you can't vote for DSA. DSA actively hates America. Vance's argument is that
we
we
can't
can't.
vote for DSA. We can't vote
No,
for DSA.
right.
We don't know if America can or can't. That's the issue here, because Trump is a radical force in American politics. He has
Yes.
created he has created a counter-radical force in American
Yes.
politics, which would not have arisen the way it has arisen without him as the originating factor by winning this insurgent election in 2016, which brought about the squad in 2018, which gave birth really to the situation that we find ourselves in 2026. And therefore, I don't think that we have any reason to believe that the American people are going to be, they're rational and reasonable, and they won't go. Who knows how they're going to feel about it. If Trump is at 35% in the approval ratings in 2028, JD Vance is the nominee, and he is running on Trump's legacy, he will not be elected president. That is as axiomatic things get. So
Sure.
I don't know where this is going, but that's what we're looking at today if we want to look forward in American politics. And I think we got to end it here. So Eli Lake and John Schanzer, our contributing editors, our wise inside outside men. Thank you so much for joining Seth and me today. I, of course, am John Podhoretz. Keep the camel burning.